I'm Tim Ventura, and in today's presentation, I'm going to walk you through a review of 40 key UAP nuclear incidents from 1945 to present, based on the investigative reports of Robert Hastings. Hastings is the author of the book UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites, which is a compendium of research that explores literally hundreds of reported UAP encounters spanning decades of time across virtually every step of the nuclear supply chain, from refining and enrichment to processing, storage, and testing. Former AATIP member Luis Elizondo has described a correlation between UAP sightings and nuclear assets such as power plants, weapons depots, launch facilities, research labs, test sites, and nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and submarines. As you'll see in this presentation, a very clear correlation does exist, but no clear answers as to why have yet been uncovered. Okay, so UAP nuclear incursions, 1945 to present. The UAP nuclear congruency. Luis Elizondo said that UAPs have been observed at US nuclear sites as well as at sites all over the globe. Quote unquote, there does seem to be some sort of congruency or intersection between the UAP and UFO sightings and our nuclear technology, whether it's nuclear propulsion, power generation, or weapon systems. And he also said that the observations have been made in other countries. They've had the same incidents. And so that's telling us that this is something that's global and not just a US strategic concern, I guess. He also indicated that there have been incidents where UAPs have interfered and brought offline our nuclear capabilities. So that was quoted in the Washington Post. Let me see. And then it also went on and said, he said in other areas, we also have data suggesting that these things have interfered with their nuclear technology and put them online. So there's enough data to demonstrate that there's interest in our nuclear technology and a potential to interfere with it. So that's kind of what got me started with this. I had read one of those quotes, I found the other. What you'll find is with the AATIP program, with Elizondo and Mellon and others, these are kind of scattered throughout there. They'll mention this nuclear congruency. And so I said, well, okay, heck, why don't I get started? I'll see if I can find something for that online. I just started with Google. You can start there. So do nuclear facilities attract UFOs? Again, I found some interesting quotes here. The answer about whether nuclear facilities attract UFOs appears to be yes. There's an excess of 3,051 UFO reports for nuclear site counties above would have been predicted based on non-nuclear counties. So there's an excess of 568 close encounter reports over what should have been expected based on other UFO reporting dynamics. So this is based on QFON. What they had said was, what we're finding is this is troubling. UFO reports happen more frequently in the vicinity of nuclear sites after you control for population and region and all of the other stuff. They don't know why. They just, they indicated that that's what's happening. So they'd also mentioned that, given that the events of September 11th drew attention to the vulnerability of nuclear power plants and terrorism, they suggested it would behoove national security agencies to redirect and focus a little bit more on this issue, right? I mean, something's happening here. We're not sure exactly what. We should probably look at it. The other one that was kind of interesting, and this has been thoroughly documented, UAP nuclear naval incursions. So this comes out of Tom Rogan and again, Luis Elizondo. I just wanted to kind of cover this because this has brought what brought this whole attention back to the limelight, even though it's been done to death. Tom Rogan had said, as I reported, the Navy is front and center for a simple reason. This is a quote. Its nuclear platforms keep attracting UFOs. UFOs tend, since the late 1940s, to appear near military nuclear weapon sites and nuclear powered platforms, such as aircraft carriers and submarine forces. The potential threat is that UFOs can detect and intercept these platforms on land, sea, or undersea with impunity. The undersea part is interesting. I think that's something that's kind of coming more to light. Very recently, we're starting to get these stories about They're not called UAPs. I believe they're called USPs. They're undersea objects that are, you know, encountered near submarines by submarines, right? Starting to get a little bit of publicity there. So Luis Elizondo had said, when you look at all the naval ships out there, like the Nimitz battle fleet, you're talking about a nuclear footprint that's bigger than most cities. The point that he's making is these things generate a lot of power, right? So they have a big footprint. And then in addition to that, you've got nuclear powered submarines that have nuclear weapons on board, as well as a nuclear power plant, a lot of other capabilities. And so he's saying maybe it shouldn't be surprised that there's an increased interest, you know, because it's high tech, there's a lot of energy, there's some weapons potential, things like that. So let me jump into kind of notable events. This is, again, I just hit Google to start out with, and hopefully I'll be able to play some of these. Okay, so I do have links here. So the Fukushima nuclear plant in 2019, this was a YouTube video by Mavix, shows 5 unidentified flying objects hovering above the Fukushima nuclear plant. The video uploaded revealed that the strange footage was shot on August 20th, 2019. 5 UFOs with glowing lights can be seen moving eerily in the skies. It's unclear whether these are different from flying ships or multiple lights from a single ship. Okay. And I'm not going to go too in depth here. Hopefully you guys can see this. My Zoom bar is getting in the way a little bit. I'm going to fast forward. So again, if you look up, you know, Fukushima UAPs, this is about a 10-minute recording. You can see these lights in the sky. And again, I'm fast forwarding through here. They're not doing a heck of a lot. They are just kind of hanging out over Fukushima. Okay, so that was the Fukushima nuclear plant, just one example. The one that really got me, this video I'm excited to play for you, is Veracruz nuclear plant, UFO video from Laguna Verde nuclear power plant, 24-year-old nuke owned and operated by the Mexican government, shot with a cell phone camera on November 5th by an engineer. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see this object pretty well. To me, this reminds me a little bit of the outline of the Navy UAPs. That's kind of what got me. And let me see, oops. Sorry, I paused it there. Okay, sorry, I just muted everybody out again. And yeah. So again, this video for me was very, very interesting. Okay, let me minimize that. Okay, so again, that was Veracruz. That was 2014. It had a resemblance to the outline, at least to my eye, of some of the Navy UAP videos, right? And again, right near a nuke plant, different people have offered explanations. Somebody suggested it was possibly a drone, but to me, it doesn't really look like a drone. It looks more like the UAPs the Navy's recorded. So these I do not have video of, but French nuclear power plants, the same year, 2014, according to Austrian news site, there were 18 separate occasions that UFOs were seen flying over nuclear power plants in France between early October and early November. The incident was announced in early 2015. Nuclear power plant in Nogent-sur-Seine, probably not pronouncing that right, southeast of Paris, reported that 2 security guards saw 2 flying objects. At first, they thought that these objects were drones flown by anti-nuke activists, but they haven't been able to track them. So a director of one of the plants, after this hit the news, he came forward and expressed the opinion that the drone wasn't what flew over his nuclear power plant. Pascal Pisani, he addressed the drone issue, stating, "Here, we haven't seen a drone. We saw a UFO, and there was no impact on the safety of our sites. Our position is clear. When there's an overflight of the site, we complain, we communicate." And the reason is, in France, I believe there's like a 5-kilometer radius for any flying vehicles around there. So, so any kind of overflight there is actually in violation of their law and gets reported. Okay, so going back in time, you guys may have noticed I'm going backwards, not forwards. So we start with the more concrete stuff. We're starting with videos, and we're kind of going back into the mists of history. War and Air Force Base, 2010. To me, these are kind of interesting because we haven't heard a lot about these Air Force Base overflights in the 2000s, but they happened. They just didn't get a lot of publicity. October 23rd, 2010, War and Air Force Base lost the ability to communicate with 50 of its Minuteman III missiles. Again, these are nuclear missiles, right? 5 missile alert facilities responsible for launching those ICBMs. Alpha through Echo comprised the 319th Strategic Missile Squadron would have been unable to do so during the disruption. So they said that this communications issue, while intermittent, actually persisted over several hours. Now, the same individuals who reported this reported sightings by numerous teams of an enormous cigar-shaped craft that maneuvered high above the missile field on the day of the disruption. It's a huge UFO that, in their words, appeared similar to a World War I German Zeppelin that had no passenger gondola or advertising on its hull like a commercial blimp would. Okay, so this one, I'm going to blow this. This is in Wales, and it's TRAWSFYNYDD power plant. Was closed and began decommissioning in 1991. In 2002, the plant had its own UFO sighting. In March of that year, Brian Roberts claimed that him and his wife saw a flying craft hovering for about 10 minutes near the plant. He described it as saucer shaped with a brilliant perimeter of light moving in a circular pattern. Now, what's interesting about this one was this plant started closing in 1993, and so was there a nuclear correlation here or not? So I started digging on this. So in 1993, they removed the highly radioactive spent fuel rods. That was completed in 1997. Intermediate level waste is being stored, or it's being removed by robots, basically. Contaminated materials being stored in a specially designed building on the site. It'll eventually be removed for deep burial in the 2040s. But what they're saying is steel reactor cores that house the fuel rods won't be removed yet because they're still far too radioactive. So the site won't be done until actually 2071. What that means is this UFO event here, even though this site was decommissioned and offline, still lots of radioactive materials, highly radioactive materials around. This one was intriguing to me. I can't show you the video for this. I didn't even store it. It's online. So Bariloche, Argentina. Okay. The story that I originally found was 2 UFO hunters went to Bariloche because they were hearing about these UFO sightings there. And what they found was a failed nuclear fusion facility that President Perón tried to start there in the 1950s. He had this brainstorm. Apparently he hired a bunch of Nazi engineers to try and build this, and they never got this thing off the ground, right? So they generated a little bit of radioactive waste or whatever, but not enough to do anything. That's the official story. So these 2 UFO hunters went there, and they saw these UFO reports in this area, and they said, well, why? You know, they found this old building, they dug in, they did some research. Well, that building, it turns out, was this fusion facility, which has been closed and decommissioned for years. So at first, I was going to write this story off because this Bariloche sighting, you know, is there anything nuclear about it? Well, no, the site's been decommissioned and cleaned for years, right? So anyhow, in 1995, Flight Captain Jorge Polanco said, at the moment when he started the last descent, he suddenly saw a white light which came directly at full speed in front of him before stopping at 100 meters. When he started his maneuvers, the object made an odd turn to accompany the descent and paced the 100 meters about us. After a while, the saucer, which was the size of an airliner, changed color. 2 green lights appeared at the ends with an orange gleam at the center, which ignited intermittently, right? So that was the HuffPost. So again, you've got these UFO sightings here. There were several aircraft sightings, as I recall. This one is just one of many. And I guess the thing that kind of made me interested about this was I said, well, is there any real nuclear connection here? Did a little bit of research. As it turns out, even though President Perron's, oops, I'm going to admit those folks, even though President Perron's fusion reactor was a failed project, it was dismantled, removed, the whole 9 yards, the Bariloche Atomic Center is one of the pioneering offices of the CNEA that had its beginnings in the 1950s. It houses a nuclear reactor built in the 80s. Nearby Institute Balsero is a research institute for physics and nuclear engineering. So Bariloche actually has one of the, if I understand this correctly, it has a training reactor that's used to train, supposedly this is one of the biggest training facilities in South America for South American nuclear engineers. They have an active nuclear reactor. So there's an absolute nuclear correlation there. Hartlepool nuclear power plant, back to Great Britain. Newly released UK government files of reported sightings of UFOs include a 1993 sighting of something strange hovering over the Hartlepool nuclear power station. Object was seen in the skies over Teesside and Cleveland area of Northeast England and has been seen over local chemical plants and military installations. In Nellis Air Force Base, 1990 to 2004. The government ended atomic weapons tests years ago, but Nevada incidents continue. Former security officers at Area 2 at Nellis Air Force Base, which was a storage facility for up to 200 nuclear warheads, have reported multiple intrusions by unknown aircraft from the late 90s through 2004. UFOs filmed by the US Air Force at Nellis, very interesting hard copy segment from 1995. So this was one of the UFOs that was shot over Nellis Air Force Base. This is from an old hard copy news story. See. Please pardon the poor resolution. Now, what is interesting, I'm going to zoom back there. This does tend to resemble our gimbal again, right? Let me see if I can pause that, right about there. So you see this rim. This is the way I interpret it. You see this kind of saucer-shaped rim. And then if you notice, there's big bumps, right? Over the top and the bottom. Oops, and yeah, you can see it a little bit better. So this, to me, this resembles the outline of gimbal, and it resembles the outline of the one that was at the Mexican nuclear reactor as well. I mean, this could be the same object. So again, that was Nellis Air Force Base. This, to me, to my eyes, that looks like the same object that was at Veracruz at the Mexican power plant. Another thing that's interesting here is, again, these didn't get a lot of publicity. I never heard about UFO sightings over nuclear plants in the 2000s, but apparently they were still happening. Chernobyl nuclear plant. Mikhail Voritsky, senior dosimetrician with the dosimetry control department, alleged that on the night of the disaster, he and others observed a UFO over reactor 4. We saw a ball of fire. It was flying slowly in the sky, 6 or 8 meters in diameter. We saw 2 rays of crimson light stretching out towards the 4th unit. The object was 300 meters from the reactor. The event lasted about 3 minutes. He'd said that the radiation levels coming from the reactor dropped from 3,000 to 800 milliroentgens per hour during that time. Now, in the following years, dozens of UAP sightings have happened near the reactor, many accompanied by photos. In some cases, fighter jets were launched. I did not find, I saw some of the photos online, lots of blurry photos, so I'm not going to put any of those up. But events over Chernobyl, going back in time, MALSTROM Air Force Base. This is a name that many people in UFOs are very familiar with, and yeah, this one comes up again and again and again. In 1986, Joseph Solka said he got a phone call about a group of lights darting around the sky. A1 was the command post for the 10th Strategic Missile Squadron. He turned on the security control lights so we could see better. Sure enough, there was a group of 5 lights zooming around the night sky. They maneuvered like nothing man-made could have then or now. It didn't move fluidly. It was like a high speed darting around, sharp angled turns, one after the other, until they all stopped at the same time. So they were moving together, right? He was saying it was late fall with an overcast sky. It was pitch black outside. He told everyone in the site about it, shut off the launch control facility perimeter lights. He said, then the phone started ringing off the hook as all the other launch control facilities in the squadron area called to report the lights. So presumably, when he shut off the lights, that made it more visible. Everybody else could kind of see those. As he hung up the phone, 5 more lights descended slowly from the clouds to join the first 5. They all stopped momentarily. Then all 10 began to dart around like crazy fireflies. Then they zipped off at high speed in all directions, disappearing into the clouds. So again, this quote comes from, this was on the Robert Hastings site, UFO Hastings website, which is worth checking out. Indian power point, nuclear power plant. I'm going to keep an eye on the time here. So what's worth noting is we've got like the last 3 of these: Chernobyl in 86, MALSTROM 86. You go from a Russian commercial power plant with an accident that's decommissioned to an active US Air Force website. Indian Point nuclear power plant is actually in, I believe, upper state New York. And this one was interesting. I visited relatives as a kid. I actually visited this nuclear power plant. And just for giggles, I said, yeah, I remember going to that one. I said, I wonder if there was ever a UFO there. Yeah, guess what? Sure enough, 1984, giant UFO sighting. An American nuclear power plant was buzzed by an enormous UFO, say the plant's security guards, local police officers, and other eyewitnesses. The New York Power Authority confirmed the sighting. Philip Imbrogno, who's associated with Dr. J. Allen Hynek's center, interviewed 6 of the 12 guards who saw the craft. They said it was a gargantuan UFO, looked diamond-shaped, 450 feet in length, bright white, but at one point it changed from white to blue to green to amber, hovered over the plant for approximately 15 minutes above about 30 stories above the exhaust funnel of one of the plant's 3 nuclear reactors. So this is, I believe, also connected, and I might be wrong here, I believe this is connected to the Hudson Valley, which I believe Bruce Cornett and others have said is a hotspot in the New York area for UFOs. But so that's Indian Point, which I just looked up on a whim, and sure enough, there were sightings. Whiteman Air Force Base. Dale Hogan said he climbed up the nuclear weapons igloo, looking at a bluish red light. Light started to do a grid pattern, went from one corner to the other, about every 3 inches back and forth on a grid. When it got to me, the light stopped because he put his hand into it, right? So this is a smaller event there. In that video, I'm not going to play this one, Bill Wickersham described the 1984 Whiteman Air Force Base incursion in detail. Byelokorovich, 1982, back to Russia following the collapse of the Soviet Union. They came forward and began discussing their involvement in a similar issue during the Cold War. At Byelokorovich, when a disc-shaped UFO hovered over a nuclear missile base for an extended period of time, a number of missiles suddenly activated without authorization from Moscow or any action being taken by the missile launch officers. Fortunately, after 15 seconds, the activation ceased, the missiles returned to standby. Again, this comes from Robert Hastings. RAF Bentwaters, everybody in ufology knows about this one. Colonel Charles Halt said that in December 1980, when he was deputy base commander at Bentwaters, strange lights in the forest were investigated by 3 patrolmen. Bentwaters was also the Rendlesham Forest sighting. Several U.S. Air Force personnel reported seeing a strange metallic object in Rendlesham Forest near RAF Woodbridge, found 3 depressions in the ground, reporting triangular craft, 3 meters on a side, dark metallic in appearance with strange markings. 2 nights later, they investigated another sighting near the base. He was told by the commander, it's back. Again, they found indentations to the ground, broken branches, and low-level background indentation. So they also said it was shedding something that looked like molten metal and shined a beam of light down towards them. So that's the UK. Kirtland Air Force Base, 1980. 3 security policemen inside the Manzano weapons storage area sighted an unidentified light in the air traveling from north to south over the Coyote Canyon area of the Department of Defense test range, traveled at great speed, stopped in the sky over Coyote Canyon. At first they thought it was a helicopter. After observing its maneuvers, they said, no, the helicopter couldn't have done that. Further events happened on August 10th and 13th, including unexplained electromagnetic interference that rendered the radar scanner and radar approach control equipment inoperative for Albuquerque Airport, along with a security guard sighting an unknown object near an alarm structure on the base. So in this case, I did a fair amount of reading on this one. There was a larger area at work here, and this was interfering with Albuquerque Airport's electronics and their radar and all of their equipment. And so this was a lot more than just Kirtland, but the events were actually happening right near Kirtland AFB. Grand Forks Air Force Base, 1977. Let me take a look at the time. I may have to push through these a little faster. So he heard on the radio they were dispatching a security alert team to investigate a situation 4, which is penetration of the launch facility. Again, this is a nuclear missile base. They were seeing unidentified lights in the sky. Some appeared reddish, kept jumping around. 1 minute they'd be hovering, but they'd rapidly move to another spot. Security personnel had been briefed about unidentified helicopters, that was what they were calling them, had been intruding above missile sites and other strategic air command bases. But what he was listening to the team on the radio. They weren't describing helicopters. He said they were rapidly jumping around at the blink of an eye. A short time later, one of the missile launch officers at Gulf told us they had lost control of the missiles right when the lights appeared over the sites. He wasn't sure if they meant all of them or only some of them. Okay, so that's Grand Forks in 77. Now, when he talked about the helicopters, he was talking about this one. And let me see, I think I cloned this. Oh no, it's not a clone of the slide. It's just a big slide. Okay, so multiple US nuclear sites. This was a series of encounters in 1975. I think it went just into 76. These were described as unknown helicopters penetrating the security of multiple nuclear, Department of Defense, Air Force Base, weapon sites, things like that. When they describe it as helicopters, it's difficult to know what that means. So it happened. They never really did figure it out. During 2 weeks in 75, a string of the nation's super sensitive nuclear missile launch sites and bomber bases were visited by unidentified, low-flying, and elusive objects. According to DoD reports, the sightings made visually and on radar occurred at installations in Montana, Michigan, and Maine. So the 3 bases were MALSTROM, Wurtsmith, and Loring Air Force Base. And you can actually, if you want, you can look those up independently. I did that. They led to extensive but unsuccessful attempts to track and detain the objects. So the Air Force and DoD described the objects as helicopters, aircraft, unknown entities, and brightly lit, fast-moving vehicles that hovered over nuclear weapons storage areas and evaded all pursuit efforts. They sent fighter planes and airborne command planes aloft to pursue them unsuccessfully. Okay. And those are the same slide. That's a duplicate. My apologies. DYESS Air Force Base. This was interesting. Again, very similar. En route to the CSC, we noticed that the MMS area was brighter than usual. The igloo bunkers that housed the nuclear weapons were surrounded by ballpark lights, which are really bright. They saw a glow over the weapons igloos, right? And again, this is something when I was looking at these, I saw this multiple times. These UFOs, UAPs are over the weapons igloos. In this case, the 3 K9 teams reported that the dogs were afraid and acting up. They were worried that the dogs would have problems, so they ordered them withdrawn. They also had a C-130 that was on approach, and they ordered that to do a flyby to try and get a look out of it. The next thing they heard was an order to fire on some kind of an object hovering over the weapons igloos. Order to move it out of the area came from SAC headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base. Seconds later, they could hear gunfire across the base. They saw a streak of bluish white light moving at high speed toward the southwest. It was the UFO getting out of there, it passed over the end of the runway. So, what do they say? They said one of the other sergeants said he'd never believed in UFOs, but now he did. Another person described it as a large ball of light that hovered 150 to 200 feet above the weapons igloos. That was DYESS in 73. Minot Air Force Base, 68. Object was sighted in the sky above a number of Minuteman missile silos. As it flew over the silos, electronic consoles at the launch control facility began acting strangely. At one point, they had to hit the inhibit switch because the launch in progress indicators had inexplicably been activated. When the flying object disappeared, the consoles reset to normal. So again, at the top of this presentation, I mentioned Luis Elizondo, and he was quoted as saying, look, these things have activated missiles on various occasions. These are the specific equations. These are specific occasions, sorry. MALSTROM Air Force Base, again, I'm not sure what it is about MALSTROM, but UAPs seem to really love this place. Robert Salas said in 1967, in the middle of the night, he got a call from one of the guards upstairs telling him they'd seen some strange lights in the sky flying fast, stopping on a dime, reversing course, and making 90-degree turns. 5 minutes later, he called back, said there was a reddish orange oval-shaped object hovering right above the front gate. When this happened, they got a call saying that the missiles were no-go. Missiles had been disabled, all reading guidance control system failure. Within seconds, they lost 10 missiles while the object was overhead. ELLSWORTH Air Force Base, 67. Let me see, retired Air Force Major Galen W. King. He was a captain, missile combat crew commander, 66 Squadron. Several cases of UFOs hovering over sites. Everyone there, quote unquote, knew that weird things were going on. So apparently many cases of this had happened. Most interesting occurrence was when he was in the Echo capsule. If I understand things correctly, that means he's at the control capsule underground, right? Limited visibility, and they're relying on teams that are, above deck to kind of let them know what's actually happening. There was a security violation and alarms, both inner and outer. They sent out a strike team and received a visual report of a UFO hovering over a launch facility. He doesn't remember which one, with a light beam coming down from the bottom of the UFO to the site. Team leader told the commander at Charlie that it looked like a flying saucer. The beam was described as reddish in color. Walker Air Force Base, and let me see, we're on slide 28. Got a call from one of their sister sites. Again, this is 1967. The other missile crew said a UFO was hovering over the site, rapidly moving away, then returning. So let me see. He's saying that at times it hovered over site 6, then flew extremely rapidly. The other site stopped and hovered over that one, basically going from one to the other in terms of missile sites, right? Minot Air Force Base, and they were in 68. This is back in 66. Launch Control Center. So basically there was issues interfering with radio transmission. While he was trying to fix that, a personnel on the surface reported seeing a UFO with a red light high in the sky. At the same time, a radar crew picked up an object at a height estimated 100,000 feet. They sent an F-84 up to try and track or stop the UFO. After several minutes, he reported seeing an object with lights of varying intensities. While he was pursuing the UFO, he noticed that his gun sight light had flashed on, indicating that his plane's radar was picking up a target. So they had it on ground radar and the F-84's radar. The object was ahead of his aircraft, but at a slightly greater altitude. Then basically it climbed rapidly and took off. So that was Minot Air Force Base. Let me see, I believe this is another one. Captain David Schindel was Minuteman ballistic missile crew commander, experienced a situation in which all 10 of the nuclear tipped missiles he was responsible for became unlaunchable. About 35 years after that incident, he learned about Captain Robert Salas' incident at MALSTROM, and that was when he decided to come forward and talk about his incident. So, okay, so then Ellsworth Air Force Base. I'm just going to try and push through these because I got about 15 minutes left. Staff Sergeant Albert Spodnik testified that someone else with his team was sent to correct an electrical malfunction that, again, rendered the Minuteman I missile temporarily inoperable. After fixing the problem, they learned that an Air Force security team had been sent to investigate a security alarm near another launch facility that had mysteriously lost power. They found an unusual object sitting within the security fence. It flashed very bright light, at which time they noticed the launch commander about the situation. So what Spodnik said was they heard the launch commander ordered the team to approach, but they refused. They asked for permission to fire on it. At which point he said, don't shoot until you know what's going on. Helicopter was ordered to the site. As it approached, the object sped away in incredible speed. That was Ellsworth. Whitman Air Force Base, 66. Whiteman Air Force Base, sorry. And I think that we've come back to this one. Anonymous soldier reported a call from Wing Security asking him to tune his radio to the base frequency, at which he began listening to a series of events involving a missile site losing power and a strike team being deployed to see a flying saucer hovering over the site. The device slowly began to depart, passing over the missile sites and causing them to lose power as it did so. Warren Air Force Base, 65. So let me see. They had UFO sightings at Echo Flight. There were times security forces would report strange things like lights in the sky. Because he was a missile commander, the security people were required to call down to the capsule and report anything unusual. The information that he got was that none of the UFOs came inside the fenced area. None of them touched down the area outside of the fence. So what he was saying was that they were all just strange aerial lights making no noise that would stack on top of one of each other and disappear. The security people described them as oblong or disc-like, no reported markings or navigation lights. If a color was reported, it was usually reddish or orange-reddish. They were orange-reddish shades. They were reported as aloft or up in the air, but he doesn't recall any mention of altitude. Vandenberg, 1964. So this is one of the few instances where a UFO interfered with an ICBM in flight. Okay, an Atlas ICBM launched from the Western Missile Testing Range was reportedly interfered with in flight by the UAP, which damaged the missile, destabilized its trajectory. Basically, what they're saying is the UAP circumnavigated the warhead while emitting 4 distinct and bright flashes of intense white light, which hit the warhead at the 4 cardinal points of the compass, or so they believed. Following this unearthly display, the craft departed in the direction from which it came. Jacobs noted that the shape of the object was that of a classic saucer. On top in the center of the disc was a dome from which the 4 bright lights emanated. So these lights, whatever it was, supposedly caused the warhead's trajectory to be disrupted. It malfunctioned, tumbled out of control into the Pacific, hundreds of miles short of where the Nike Zeus was to intercept it in a crucial test of missile defense capabilities. Now, if I remember, I believe this is the one that I'm thinking of here. So this is one where the military, because this was a test, they actually hired someone with a camera. They had multiple cameras on this thing to film this from a distance. And I believe that there is actually black and white footage of this test out there somewhere. But it was reported that they at least filmed that. So Kirtland Air Force Base, 1964. Again, is it again? Maybe. Let me see, civil aeronautics at the tower, white light traveling eastwards across the airfield. It appeared to maneuver. A brief radar contact was confirmed before men saw a dark object descend steeply at the end of the runway. They crossed the airfield and it crossed the airfield at a moderate speed. Through binoculars, it appeared to be 15 to 20 feet tall, vertically elongated and egg-shaped with a single light at the base, came within 3,000 feet of the tower before hovering, and then it moved eastwards to the base boundary. They called the Albuquerque Radar Approach Control Unit, who were able to confirm that the target moved eastwards in the expected area. Let me see. Target moved back towards Kirtland, hovering over the outer south marker of the north-south runway. Finally took up position half a mile behind a C-46, leaving base and followed it for 14 miles before again hovering over the outer marker and fading. So this was about a 20-minute contact. That was actually in Wikipedia. Nevada test site, 1955. Again, we're going back in time here. 14 A-bombs were detonated as part of Operation Teapot, witnessed by thousands of military personnel. But there were other observers as well. It was what we called flying saucers. They were prevalent at the test site back then. So a former test site photographer. This one was reported by George Knapp. I think you guys all know George pretty well. Great Falls, MALSTROM, 1950. This one was interesting. So, okay, we're back in MALSTROM Air Force Base. Bright light caught Mariano's eye, and according to reports, he saw two bright silvery objects rotating while flying over Great Falls at a speed he estimated to be 200 to 400 miles per hour. He got his 16mm movie camera and filmed the UFOs for 16 seconds. At Wright Pat, the film was examined, and they said it was reflections from two F-94 jet fighters that were over Great Falls at the time. The controversy arose when he claimed that they cut a few minutes of his film footage, which clearly showed the videos were rotating discs. And people in the Great Falls area who had viewed his footage supported those claims. They claimed that the missing frames clearly show the UFOs as spinning metallic discs with a notch or band around their outer edges, which again, it reminds me a lot of, that description is very similar to Veracruz, very similar to the other videos. So the Air Force went back in 1952 and did a more detailed analysis of the films, and they concluded that the objects were not birds, balloons, or meteors. And the original conclusion that the objects were reflections from the jets was also ruled out. So basically the Air Force kind of dismissed this one and then came back later, took a closer look and said, no, that's not the case. This was interesting to me for a couple of reasons. This was one where it made a lot of local news headlines. So that was that was interesting, I guess, in that context. It was also interesting because when you talk about UFOs being sighted around nuclear facilities, nuclear weapon silos, things along those lines, usually it's right in the proximity of those. In this case, Great Falls is right near MALSTROM, right? It's only a few miles away. And so what you're seeing is UFO reports that are in the area of these facilities, right? Which you would expect. You would expect that if the UAP or the UFO has an interest in the nuclear facility, I mean, it's got to get there, it's going to leave, right? People are going to see it coming and going. So there's a correlation with reports in the greater area, as well as just around the facility itself. Oak Ridge, 1949. Officials at the OSI in Knoxville, and again, I'm almost out of time, but I'm almost done too. Flying saucer was sighted at Oak Ridge, consisted of 3 objects, 1,000-foot altitude, 2 identical rectangular shaped objects, which appear to be coordinated in movement and moved in a wave-like motion. Third object was circular in shape and appeared to be in level flight between 2 rectangular objects. That came out of Project Blue Book. Killeen Air Force Base, 1949. On patrol at the Special Weapons Project, saw a blue-white oblong object hovering near the area, followed by Army patrol issues. Nearly a dozen sightings of objects were seen in the 2 months at Camp Hood, Killeen Air Force Base. Metallic cone and cigar shapes and diamond-shaped lights in the sky were repeatedly described. Roswell, 1947, which probably needs no introduction whatsoever. I think we could probably effectively skip this. It's just worth mentioning that, again, with Roswell, that's tied to the 509th Bomb Group. They had nuclear weapons, you know, so there's a correlation there. Hanford nuclear site. This is as far back as I went. A fireball on 3 separate nights buzzed the Hanford plutonium production plant. Members of the Navy Hellcat fighter squadron in Pasco tried to intercept a fireball over the facility. The bright object evaded the planes and zipped away. Let me see. He basically said he reported chasing a bright ball of fire. And according to his account, he could never catch a thing, which after a few minutes zoomed off towards Seattle and off the radar. So this is interesting because this Hanford sighting goes back to before Roswell, right? Roswell, I think, is generally accepted as the first. So I'm going to finish up here because I'm almost out of time with more resources. I've got just about 40 events that I've documented today. I appreciate all of your patience. I found a book called UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings. It's on Amazon. The book is 500 pages long. It has hundreds more UAP sighting events at nuclear power plants, weapons depots, processing facilities, naval shipyards, and more. So UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings. He also has a website, let me skip back there, called ufohastings.com. Some of the materials I've used came from that website. I would recommend visiting that website. He has a little bit more there as well. But I think if you really wanted to drill down into this, his book, a lot of the stories are anecdotal. They're hard to prove, but nonetheless, it is a massive compendium. And this I just learned about the other day, Trinity by Jacques Vallée. That was co-authored by Paola Harris and Jacques Vallée. It explored a report about a New Mexico crash and recovery in 1945, 2 years before the Roswell incident, and the famous sighting by Kenneth Arnold in 1947. So again, the mythology says that 47 is when most of this stuff started, but now we're pushing that date up to 1945, you know, in terms of the modern era. The correlation between the crash of the object and the explosion of the first atom bomb in White Sands, less than 20 miles away, has been missed by the media. Harris and Vallée suggest that the correlation is significant for various physical, geographic, and biological reasons, aside from the obvious strategic implications.